Hey, Larken Rose here, with my handy-dandy microphone holder, state of the art. So I was just working on the mirror, and by the way, I've achieved a rather humongous milestone in that the script, the interactive flowchart, is now finished. I'm sure there will be little tinkerings and additions and improvements and stuff along the way, but it's basically finished. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm not going to tell you right here. Maybe I'll do a different video about that. But the reason I bring it up is because there's a question in the mirror designed to make people think, if you can imagine that. If you had been born in a different place, or maybe born in the same place, but then raised by other people with other beliefs who lived in a different country, in a different culture, in a different part of the world, would you have the same beliefs that you have now? The reason that question makes people uncomfortable is that the answer is obviously no. You would be different in lots and lots of ways. Now, there may be some fundamental beliefs you would have reached anyway. Maybe it would have been a different path that led to more or less the same destination, as it were. But there would be a ton different about what you think. If you were surrounded by people of different religious beliefs, of different political beliefs, of different just cultural influences, you'd be a different person. In fact, it would be sort of even hard to call you because you would be so different. If, like, a day after you were born, your entire environment and all of your influences and all of the beliefs you were surrounded by and exposed to, if those were all different, would anybody really be so arrogant to pretend that they would be the exact same person that they are today? That does not, however, mean that I think somebody's just a product of their environment and the outcome's going to be, like, predestined. Because people can think things, they can doubt things, they can question things, they can change their mind about things. Sure, most of you can relate to that. I know I can. However, the point of this video wasn't to bring up that question, but to bring up the fact that the answer to that question being obviously you have different outlooks in some ways and different opinions on some things. You would have been, influenced in other directions on some issues, even if you thought about things and ended up in the same place on certain issues and concepts and ideas and philosophical principles. But if that's the case, the follow-up question is, well, how much of your upbringing and the influences you were surrounded by and all that stuff, the things you were surrounded by your entire life, how much of your current view and your current moral code and your current philosophy isn't the result of you carefully thinking things out? It's just a direct effect of who you were surrounded by. And the answer is, for almost everybody, almost everything they think is a result of that. And when people change their minds about certain things, like, that demonstrates that, okay, they're not just bound to be whatever the people around them believed. They are capable of questioning and doubting and changing their mind about stuff. But there's a whole lot of the way people think that has nothing to do with, well, I learned facts and I applied evidence to those facts and I reached these conclusions. A massive amount, especially when they're young and don't even, their logical skills are nothing. They're thrown into this world they know nothing about, and they look at the people around them. Well, I guess I have to believe them. I'm going to be like them. I'm going to mimic them. I mean, even animals do that. But little baby people, what they're best at is mimicking other people. It's how they learn language without any reference point. Like, every baby has learned a language on his own without a teacher. And you may say, well, no, parents teach them. Well, yes, sort of, kind of, except there was no reference point. They didn't start with a language. They started with nothing. They had to, on their own, notice, wait, that particular sound, I've noticed that before, and it seems like that sound shows up when that person shows up, or when this kind of food shows up. Maybe the sound means the food. The baby has to do that on his own because he doesn't know any words yet. Nobody can explain that to him. Anyway, this is a weird tangent. But the point is, there's a whole bunch that the little baby human figures out on his own based on what he's surrounded by. But he doesn't figure out anything based on things he has no exposure to. So if you're surrounded by one set of beliefs and behaviors and one language, like if you're surrounded by people who speak English, and then somebody drops you in China, you're not suddenly going to speak Mandarin just magically. You didn't know that. You didn't think that way. You didn't know any of that. You were never exposed to any of that, so it's completely foreign to you. Well, the same is true of ideas and concepts and principles. You're going to be influenced by the beliefs of people around you. Same is true of me. And I'm not even saying that's a bad thing. It's not. It's an inevitable thing. And hopefully, if parents are trying to help their offspring not be like psychotic monsters, they're sort of trying to teach values and morals and how to be nice to other people and things like that. But the amount of biases that everybody is exposed to has way more to do with what most people believe than actually thinking things out and being objective and analyzing things. And there's a bunch of cultural things that I'm still sort of agnostic about. Well, I can see this and I can also see that, and is one better? I don't know. Do I have my own biases? Yeah, because of the people I was surrounded with and the beliefs I was surrounded with. And I think it takes sort of an extra effort to be on the lookout for, like, I think this is totally true because my parents said it was and everybody I knew said it was, so I'm going to pretend to have some strong righteous conviction about this belief. Well, have you ever thought about it, or are you just sort of faithful to whatever is familiar? Because that's not thinking. That's just kind of like a dog can do that. That's just being trained and then behaving that way. So anyway, I wanted to just make this quick video because for almost everybody, we kind of have the illusion that we decided what we believe and what we think. And for 99% of the things we think, well, no, we didn't really. And for a lot of people, it's 100% of what they think. Because if they've never been exposed to ideas outside of what they think, for example, if they've never been exposed to the idea that there's no such thing as a legitimate ruling class, that will feel foreign and ridiculous to them, and they will be absolutely, completely, totally sure that that's silly. And of course, government is legitimate, and it's necessary, and it's valid, and we'd all be killing and eating each other if not for government. They firmly believe all these things, and they think that they believe those things as a result of logic and evidence. And no, they don't. They were just surrounded by lots and lots of other people who were taught that bullshit too. And they've never looked at it. And the reason I can say that is when you look at it, there's nothing logical about it. People are untrustworthy. Therefore, let's take some of the worst people and give them the right to violently rule everybody else. That'll fix the untrustworthiness of man. Will it though? So, I think it's important even for people who like to think about things and philosophize about things to keep in mind their own biases when trying to analyze, well, what do we actually know? What actually makes sense, and what's just things we took on faith, things we took for granted, things we believe because everybody around us believed. And there's a whole lot of those. There's a bajillion different examples. But if you're a voluntarist talking to statists, you have to also keep in mind that most other people think that what they believe in and what they think has been like thought out and has a rational basis. And no, it does not. For most people, most of the time, it absolutely does not. But they believe that it does. They think their political beliefs actually have a rational foundation. I did. When I was like conservative leaning that flavor of statist, I thought it made sense. There were a whole bunch of areas I never looked at and nobody ever was like whispering in my ear, have you ever questioned how the hell people could have delegated rights they don't have in the first place? Like the Constitution? How does that make any sense? Nobody suggested that. I never thought of that for many, many years. But I was super sure that my political beliefs, they made sense. They added up. They were principled, so on and so forth. The funny thing is I fell off the political spectrum precisely because I'm so weird that at some point I decided to look at the premises and go, wait, does that make sense? Is it okay for people to be forcibly taxed, extorted for their own good to pay for a military or the police or whatever? Does that line up with the other things I say I believe in, where I'm against theft? Huh. And so when I finally looked at it, these things I was so sure about before. I mean, I was so sure I'd like give talks about it because I was already sort of vocal and liked to argue and stuff even when I was, right-leaning, limited statist. It was still pretty libertarian constitutionalist leaning. I wasn't like a fascist or anything. But I was super sure about the things I had never thought about just because that's what I had been surrounded with. And that's true of almost everybody. And keep that in mind when you're trying to figure out the truth, how many biases that are just your own experience sort of trick you into thinking that there must be some foundation, there must be some reason everybody I know thinks that. Well, maybe there is and maybe there's not. You might want to check. But also, not just when your own thoughts and ponderings, but when talking to other people, you need to keep in mind how much they think their beliefs are the result of thought. And they're not at all. And so it takes a special approach. That's why Candles in the Dark exists. Because it takes a special approach to try to get someone to reconsider something they've always been surrounded by. They've taken on faith. They've never questioned it. They've never looked at it. They've never felt the need to, because it never occurred to them that there was the slightest possibility that that fundamental assumption was completely wrong and utterly bonkers. But the truth is, the foundation of pretty much every political belief, except anarchism, which is really anti-political, is completely bonkers and insane and completely irrational. And the challenge is trying to gently help people come to that realization when it goes against what they've been exposed to their entire lives. And that's a challenge, to say the least. If you've never heard of Candles in the Dark, I will put the link in the description below, because that's what we're up against. Lots and lots and lots and lots of people who think that their beliefs are thought out and rational. And they're not.